Thank you, Diane. Good morning. I'm Kristen McIntyre and happy to be today's service coordinator. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? Great. Before we start, we have a few brief announcements. And if you're new to North Chapel, welcome. We ask you to consider signing the guest book at the back of the sanctuary. We're still taking COVID precautions, so ask that you mask. After today's service, we'll be meeting on the lawn for lemonade, so please come join us. And tonight, the Change the World kids are having a pizza party, and everyone's invited to celebrate their graduating seniors. On Wednesdays, Rivers by the Lunch by the Rivers continue. And the electric vehicle event that was scheduled for today after the service has been postponed, but Green Mountain Power has left a stack of flyers and pens in the back, and their website has a lot of great information as well. I'm also happy to announce that the Woodstock Community Shelf, the food drop-off bin, is back, and it's right by the entrance, so please bring your non-perishable items and drop them off there. And finally, if you haven't done so already, please turn off your cell phones. This morning's reflection is titled Grace, Part 3. And earlier this week, the summary of the reflection inspired me to go back and read through one of my favorite books by Anne Lamott, Plan B, Further Thoughts on Faith. I'd like to share one passage. She starts, "Help is a prayer that's answered." Though I have to say it's not always answered in the way we hope for or on the timeline we'd like. It doesn't matter how you pray, with your head bowed in silence, or crying out in grief, or dancing. Churches are good for prayer, but so are garages and cars and mountains and showers and dance floors. Years ago, I wrote an essay that began, "Some people think that God is in the details, but I have come to believe that God is in the bathroom." Prayer usually means praise or surrender, acknowledging that you've run out of bullets, but there are no firm rules. As Rumi wrote, there are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground.
What magnifies the hidden heroism within you, within us? The secret of life is enjoying the passage of time. Any fool can do it. There ain't nothing to it. Nobody knows how we got to the top of the hill. But since we're on our way down, we might as well enjoy the ride. and good Sunday. I hope that this new day finds you well. Today is Sunday, August the 7th, and the title of this morning's reflection is Grace, Part Free. It's a rebellious sequel to Grace, Part 1. Of course, our reflection of July the 17th. This reflection is rebellious because it is out of sequence and out of step. It's out of sequence because the obvious sequel to Grace Part 1 is Grace Part 2, which does not exist. We are leaping right over that one onto the next. So we're leaping out of sequence into what would be Grace Part 3, which is misleading because Grace Part 3 is misspelled and mispronounced to suit the needs of the moment that is before us. So we have Grace, not Grace Part 3, but Grace Part Free, as if there were jelly beans in my mouth. It's a spiritual concept that I hope we find interesting today. So welcome to the dreamers and to the seekers of spirit. Welcome to the wanderers and to the worshipers alike. Know that we are held, and honored by a love that knows no bounds. To all souls, I say good morning. It is good to be together. I tried to make, apologies up front, I tried to turn on the heat this morning. I couldn't get it hot, so I apologize for how frigid it is in the room right now. I'm sorry. I have a question for you. Do you believe in fate? Or do you believe in free will? Which one do we prefer? The one that brings us to our senses or the one that brings us to our knees? Do you believe that life is fixed by the myriad heavenly stars above, or do you believe that we have a hand in changing things? Can we make a positive difference in the world? I know that we can, but what does your mind answer to this question? What is the choice of your soul? It really isn't hard to change the world. Any fool can do it. And unfortunately, too many have. Green, Jones, and so many others. Because it's easy to become spectacular by way of obscenity or by violence. It's easy to become meaninglessly outrageous for a little while and to gain notoriety by berating the survivors of high school shootings, like the one in Parkland, Florida. Marjorie Taylor Greene has made this choice in life. And it's easy to gain notoriety by canceling the survivors of the elementary school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. Alex Jones of InfoWars has taken this approach. His conspiracy theory directed him and his media company to champion the idea that the Sandy Hook elementary school shooting that took 26 lives in 2012 was quote-unquote a false flag event. Are you familiar with this story? He called it a hoax. He said that it didn't happen, that the grieving parents were actors, shattering the hearts of the families whose lives were already clearly shattered, and convincing 25% of the country of something that was not true, and setting the stage for even more monstrous lies that have followed, like the big lie about the stolen presidential election of 2020. The truth is so important, but Alex Jones pretends that it isn't for many, and at too high a cost to be protected by the First Amendment. It's not a value that we should be upholding. For years, we've been putting up with this nonsense, this absurdity, this insanity that is his identity politics and his culture war business plan. Recently, though, there has been a change. I suppose that one could say that Alex Jones has finally met his fate this week. If you've been following the news, you know that a Texas judge just ruled against him in a lawsuit brought by Neil Heslin and Scarlett Lewis, the parents of 6-year-old Jesse, who was killed in Newtown, killed in one of the deadliest school shootings in United States history. In a single judgment, Alex Jones was ordered to pay Jesse's parents more than $45 million. And there were other pending lawsuits, so we're calling this a win. We are saying that he finally met his fate, but is that true? What is the meaning of fate in this case? We monetize the spiritual meaning in our world. We like to have an exact number. We think that it shows something that is definitive. It has become an easy way, a convenient way of evaluating right and wrong, a way of comparing atrocities. But fate has nothing to do with judicial award or cost. Don't get me wrong, I am willing to call this a win because $45 million is a lot of money, even though Heslin and Lewis sought more than $150 million in their lawsuit. Their child, one of 26 people who was lost to us that day. It's elementary, isn't it, to do the math, the awful math, the vulgar equation of loss, as we tend to discuss it in the news. For Alex Jones did not deny the death and invalidate the life of a single child. His InfoWars program did not claim that only 25 people were lost in the Sandy Hook shooting. If Jones's fate could be truly measured in money, he would not owe a single reward of slightly more than $45 million. He would owe 26 awards of $150 million. He would owe the Sandy Hook families a total of $3.9 billion. And were this the case, had this actually been the judgment of the Texas court, that money would not come close to the value of having even one more day's worth of joy of being alive for those 26 children and their families. Alex Jones doesn't know this yet. He seems to lack the capacity to know. The lawsuits are beginning to bring him to his senses, but what fate will bring him to his knees? I ask that honestly, spiritually, and lovingly. This conversation is vulgar and absurd, and for this I offer an apology. Not an apology in the narrow sense. It's not a personal thing. The word apology is commonly understood at the personal level. An apology is a regretful acknowledgement of an offense or failure. It is often taken as an admission of guilt and often coupled with qualities of shame and indignation. The apology is also larger than this. It's a formal and public statement of regret, such as one issued by a newspaper or a government or another organization. The apology that I offer is not described by either of these definitions. Such an apology would not be worthy of this free pulpit, worthy of this house of worship, or worthy of any one of us. The apology that I offer stands apart from all of this. It's the third definition of the word apology. This is the one that I mean, where apology is a reasoned argument or justification of something, typically a theory or a religious doctrine. In the aftermath of the terrorist attacks of 9/11, a man named Richard Clark made an apology. Do you remember this? It was about 20 years ago now, so I can hardly blame you if you don't. Between 1998 and 2003, Richard Clark was the National Coordinator of Security, Infrastructure Protection, and Counterterrorism for the United States. At the time, he was popularly known as the counterterrorism czar. There were lots of American czars back then. There was a drug czar, there was an energy czar, an education czar, and we don't seem to use that term very much these days for obvious reasons. It's a problematic reference in the context of the war in Ukraine. In any case, in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks of 2001, in the hearings before the 9/11 Commission that issued this report, Richard Clark said this. He said, "I welcome these hearings because they are an opportunity. They provide us with an opportunity. They provide an opportunity to the American people to better understand the tragedy of 9/11 and what happened, and what we must do to prevent a recurrence. I also welcome these hearings because it is finally a forum where I can apologize to the loved ones of the victims of 9/11, to them who are here in the room, to those of you who are watching on television. Your government failed you. Those entrusted with protecting you failed you, and I failed you." End quote. His was a powerful and personal apology, but it was also much more than that. It stood apart from apology itself, it seems, because it was not linked to shame or indignation. It was not an admission of individual guilt. It was also a reasoned argument in favor of an institutional transparency that would serve us, increased coordination between governmental agencies, a higher level of integrity within the government. It was a reasoned argument against demagoguery. Demagoguery is the political system that seeks to support itself by appealing to popular desires and prejudices rather than using a totally rational argument. So when the sweets seller, the candy man, beats the dentist for office, we call this demagoguery. If this becomes the predominant practice in a democracy, then the country's education system has failed its citizens. This explains, in a basic sense, why Socrates distrusted democracy. Plato explained all of this in a book he wrote called Apologia, or The Apology, back in the day, meaning 2,400 years ago, back in 399 BCE. Socrates stood up for what he thought was right. He staked his life upon it, and he was martyred for it. He was executed because he would not betray his beliefs. This was his fate. It was his choice, some might say, which brings us back around to the original question this morning. Do you believe in fate? Or do you believe in free will? Which one of these do you prefer? Do you believe that life is fixed by the myriad stars up in the heavens, or do you believe that we have a hand in changing things? Can we truly make a difference in the world? What does your mind say? What does your soul choose? Do we have the power? Do we have the grit to be truly courageous in our responses this morning? Can we choose without narrow apology, which is to say without shame and indignation? Can we choose to make a reasoned defense of what we believe? When I first confronted this choice between free will and fate, I knew what I was supposed to believe, and I knew what comforted me. Intuitively, I knew that I was supposed to believe in free will. I'm a Unitarian Universalist, right? Choice is our middle name. Besides, free will is what they believe in The Matrix, and I really loved that movie. I love the exchange between the two of the central characters, Morpheus and Neo. I love the part when Morpheus raised the question. He said, "Do you believe in fate, Neo?" And Neo said, "No." And Morpheus smiled, and Morpheus asked him why he didn't believe in fate. And Neo said, "Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my own life." Well, there it is. That's me. That was me up until I met up with Grace. That was me until Grace brought me to my knees. Grace showed up as a Sufi, and this is not a magical story. It was an everyday event in seminary. This Sufi's name was Sheikh Yasir Chadli. He was from Afghanistan. He was an advisor and an adjunct professor at the Star King School for the Ministry in California. He was also much more than that. He was a sage. He knew how to be my teacher. He recognized me and my headstrong ways. Yasir asked me the same question that Morpheus asked Neo in The Matrix. He phrased it differently, but the question was essentially the same. He said, "Do you believe in fate or free will?" And I responded predictably. I said that I believed in free will, and he proceeded to tell me a story. He told me that a young man was wandering in the desert for hours, and he came upon the tent of an old wise man. And the young man asked if he could enter. He was needing water, and he was needing a few moments of shade to cool his feet. And the old man let the young man in and was glad to tend to his needs. He got him some water, and he gave him some shade. He was also asked a question. The wise old man asked, "Do you believe in fate or free will?" And the young man answered just as I did, as many of you, perhaps, as Neo did in that Matrix movie. The young man said, "I believe in free will," with the confidence of his years. And the old wise man said, "Lift one of your feet in the air." And the young man complied immediately out of respect for the old wise man, shifting his weight to his right foot and lifting his left foot behind him. Now, and the old wise man said, "Very good, now that is free will. Now, lift your other foot in the air." And once again, the young man complied, immediately placing his left foot down and reshifting his weight, this time lifting his right foot in the air behind him. "No, no, no. the wise men said. Perhaps I was unclear in my instructions. I need you to lift your second foot without placing your first foot back on the ground. The young man said, I cannot do that without falling to my knees. And the old wise men smiled and said, lifting your first foot, that was your choice. That was your free will. Lifting your second foot, that would have been your fate. Each way is a journey of grace. Free will seems to bring us to our senses, and almost always the journey of fate seems to bring us to our knees. Sting writes, I walked out this morning, it was like a veil had been removed from before my eyes. For the first time I saw the work of heaven in the line where the hills had been married to the sky, and all around me, every blade of singing grass was calling out your name, that our love would always last. And inside every turning leaf is the pattern of an older tree, the shape of our future and the shape of all of our history. And out of the confusion where the river meets the sea came things I'd never seen. Things I'd never seen, I was brought to my senses. I was blind, and now I can see. And this is grace. And this grace borrows from a song that is familiar to us. I was blind, and now I see. A song that rises out of the American landscape in ways that are deeply beautiful, revelationary, right? For the veil has been removed from before our eyes, a revelation, a revealing, a disillusionment. Now, I wish I could write the best book about the blues, a book that could be bold and brash and bawdy without having to apologize, a book that could be as fierce as the blues has to be to cut through the lies and the doublespeak of our time, to pierce through the illusion to get to the good gold core of who we truly are and what we truly love, a means of overcoming blindness, a means of seeing our way through to the amazing grace that works for us, in a language and in a way that unfolds comfortably in our tradition, beautifully in our tradition, in a way that serves us when we are most dearly in need. When I visited Diana a few days ago, I asked her some of these questions and shared with her what I hoped to play for you. I asked her if she thought it was a good idea, and she said yes. So I'd like to share what I played with her. And yes, I did bring an electric guitar into the hospital. A couple of weeks ago, I lost a friend of mine named Reverend Rob Eller Isaacs. He died about 2 weeks ago. I cried a goodbye for him at Star Island a few days ago. He was a great teacher to me. He helped to shape my ministry after my seminary, and he charged me as a minister at my ordination in St. Paul. He offered me his highest wishes. The picture that you see on the covers of your order of service is that part in the service where he's doing the charge. It was a powerful moment to me, although it could have been quite awkward. In the church in St. Paul, there is a lot of tradition. There is a way of doing things. There were rules, and the rule when you get charged and ordained in that church is that you get charged on your knees. You kneel as the ordinand before the teacher, and the teacher looks right down at you. It's very hierarchical and very weird and also really kind of lovely. Only I didn't know if I could do it. Surrender is an essential aspect of ministry. Ministers are charged in the attitude of surrender in this tradition. It's a healthy practice for the soul, but racial realities complicate that moment for me, even in church, especially in church, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it. Part of my ministry is working with people of color in the Twin Cities, and they were all invited to the ordination, and they all looked up to me. I can't say that they all liked me or knew me particularly well, but they respected the church and my place in it. How could I kneel in this way? What would they think? What would that message be on such a solemn occasion? My family was going to be there, and my father was going to see this happen. What would he think? And after all the sacrifices that he and my mother made coming out of the 60s and the violence that they saw, I honestly didn't know if I was going to be able to go to my knees in good faith before God with racial conditions being as bad as they were. This was before the high-profile cases of Philandro Castile and Dante Wright, before the world awakening case of the murder of George Floyd. But you could feel something in the distance, even if you couldn't identify it or know what it was. And then when the moment came, I was terrified. I didn't know what would be the right thing to do. When I stepped forward to meet my teacher, I had tears in my eyes. And suddenly, he went to his knees. And with his body, he asked me to join him there. And boom, I was on the ground. I was on my knees. I joined him there. It was a complex moment of grace. It was great. It was grace, part fate. and part free. And when he died 2 weeks ago, all I could think about was this. We used to sing a song together before every meal. And the song we would sing would be, call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down. Beauty above us, beauty below us, beauty around us and between us. So call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down a blessing, call down. I was bound and tied and committed and accountable to racial justice. And so was my mentor, my teacher, my friend of spirit and life, my brother in faith, my brother in this amazing grace of living and loss, one part fate and one part free. Be bound by nothing less than the sacred wind and by the blessings that we call down from the sky. Be driven by nothing less holy than fearless love. May we know grace in deepest measure and in truest heart. One part fate and one part free, may it be so. Blessed be and amen.